James I, the successor to Elizabeth I, who united the kingdoms of England and Scotland. This was a king who wrote treatises condemning homosexuality as a horrific sin, on par with murder. Yet he openly surrounded himself with male lovers. He even built a secret passage directly from his royal bedroom to his lovers' chambers. London buzzed with whispers. If Queen Elizabeth was a powerful king, now they had an effeminate queen. He was described as a quiet man, somewhat nervous but possessing a sharp intellect. And now, prepare to uncover 12 bizarre facts about England's first gay king. The contradiction within James I was one of his most peculiar traits. Despite his own same-sex inclinations, James I authored a harsh treatise against sodomy in 1599, categorizing homosexuality alongside witchcraft and murder as an unforgivable sin. This painted a picture of a king riddled with internal conflict. On one hand, a learned intellectual and public defender of morality, and on the other, a private life that starkly contradicted everything he preached. Historians believe James might have justified his actions by the prevalent belief of the time that laws did not apply to kings, as the king can do no wrong. He truly believed his divine status exempted him from the rules he imposed on his subjects, showcasing not only hypocrisy, but also a deep conviction in absolute royal power. The popular view of James is that he was a blatant hypocrite, abusing his position for his own desires. However, some scholars suggest this could be a form of cognitive dissonance, where James attempted to reconcile his religious convictions and public role with his deep personal urges. He might have genuinely believed what he wrote, yet was unable to control his personal instincts. Regardless, this behavior created a complex image of a king who was both a learned intellectual and a keeper of controversial personal secrets. James's first intimate relationship with a male companion began very early, when he was just 13 years old. Esme Stuart, his father's cousin, arrived in Scotland from France in 1579. Despite being 37, married and a father, Stuart became a confidant, advisor, and even a paternal figure to the young King James. Stuart was known for his charm and sophistication. James showered Stuart with countless gifts and titles. In 1581, James made him Duke of Lennox, the only ducal title in Scotland at the time, an immensely prestigious honor. James loved Lennox so much that he even gave Lennox jewelry from his own mother's collection, Mary, Queen of Scots. The public displays of affection between James and Lennox were recorded by contemporary witnesses as unusually intimate. The letters exchanged between them also express strong emotions and devotion, with some interpreting the language as hinting at a physical relationship. Some historians suggest James's need for a close male companion stemmed from his unstable childhood. James became King of Scotland at just 13 months old after his mother's abdication, and his early years were dominated by power struggles among Protestant nobles. The absence of a strong parental figure created a deep emotional void within him. However, this intimate relationship posed a serious threat to the Protestant nobility. On August 23, 1582, as James was hunting near Ruthven Castle, a group of disgruntled nobles attacked and captured him in a surprise raid. Their main goal was to break Lennox's control over the king. James, then just 16, reportedly cried when abducted and felt helpless. This capture stripped him of the sense of security he had with Lennox and exposed the vulnerability of a young monarch. After 10 months of imprisonment and many failed rescue attempts, James was forced to consent to Lennox's exile from Scotland. He never saw Lennox again, yet their bond remained strong, evidenced by the secret letters they continued to exchange. A haunting symbol of their connection emerged after Lennox's death in Paris in May 1583. His embalmed heart was carried back to James in Scotland by Lennox's old friends. The loss of childhood and the instability of power created James's deep need for a close male companion, even if it defied social prejudice. Despite marrying Anne of Denmark in 1589 and having 7 children, James lacked emotional or intellectual connection with the Queen. He often held a low opinion of women, a common view in the male-dominated era. James was known to be openly bisexual, and his public relationships with male lovers stirred much controversy. He was recorded as frequently kissing his close male friends and sharing his bed with them. This led to scandalous rumours about him in London. One famous rumour spread that while Queen Elizabeth had been a king, meaning masculine and powerful, now they had a queen, meaning effeminate and dainty, referring to James and his demeanour and preference for male lovers. This public display challenged the social and religious norms of the time, especially with the growing and conservative puritanical sects. Despite being a king, James's personal life constantly faced criticism and judgment. This highlights the stark contrast between his role as a monarch and his personal nature, revealing a surprisingly human aspect of the king. When James I ascended the throne in England, he brought with him a system of favoritism for his intimate male companions from Scotland. He bestowed titles and powerful positions upon them based on personal relationships rather than merit or noble birth. James believed these men, with their less stable power base, would be more loyal and dependent on him. Notable examples include Sir James Hay and Philip Herbert, Earl of Montgomery. Sir James Hay, a Scot, impressed James with his education and sophistication, receiving numerous titles and important positions, with the king even paying his debts and arranging a wealthy marriage for him. Philip Herbert also quickly gained the king's favour at just 19. James swiftly made Herbert a gentleman of the bedchamber, a knight, and later the Earl of Montgomery. James did not hesitate to pay Philip Herbert's gambling debts, demonstrating unprecedented patronage. This favoritism created fierce opposition within the English court. English nobles were outraged by the power and wealth bestowed upon these common Scots. They saw this as a threat to their own positions and influence. James himself was a lavish spender, and his use of royal funds to pay his lovers' debts increasingly drained the royal treasury. James also became more openly affectionate with his lovers, further fueling hatred and suspicion within the court. This excessive favoritism contributed to financial and political instability, shaping the conflicts of James's later reign. In 1607, a handsome young man named Robert Carr caught James's eye after an accident at a jousting tournament. Carr was described as a young man with a fine physique and smooth features. James quickly became captivated by Carr, even personally teaching him Latin and publicly displaying his affection. James often walked arm in arm with Carr through the palace, making no secret that Carr was his most favoured companion. However, not everyone accepted this relationship. Prince Henry, James's eldest son, openly expressed his disapproval of his father's relationship with Carr. Prince Henry held deep religious convictions against homosexual acts and was displeased that James dedicated all his attention to Carr. But then, Prince Henry suddenly died in November 1612 at the age of 18. Although a great loss for both James and Queen Anne, Henry's death removed a major barrier to James's favoritism towards Carr. Carr exploited the king's weakness to persuade him to dissolve Parliament in 1610, demonstrating his political leverage. In the following years, Carr was promoted to Privy Councillor, Earl of Somerset and Treasurer of Scotland, wielding significant power. James's relationship with Carr shows the king's ability to ignore opposition, even from his own son, to maintain personal relationships vital to him. Although Robert Carr, Earl of Somerset, had reached the pinnacle of power, tragedy struck when his close relationship with Thomas Overbury became complicated. Carr fell in love with Frances Howard, a married woman, and wished to marry her. Overbury fiercely opposed this marriage, distrusting the Howard family and fearing for Carr's position. To remove Overbury, Howard persuaded James to imprison him. James agreed, ordering Overbury's committal to the Tower of London in April 1613. Overbury mysteriously died in prison in September 1613, initially believed to be from natural causes. However, a later investigation in July 1615 revealed that Overbury had not died of natural causes but had been poisoned. Carr's wife, Frances Howard, was convicted of murder. There was evidence that Frances held a deep-seated animosity towards Overbury. Although it seemed Carr was unaware of his wife's poisoning plot, he was still implicated. James also believed Carr was involved, and his letters to Carr were used as evidence in court. These letters, while not directly proving murder, indicated a lack of diligence and abuse of the king's trust. This scandal led to Carr's rapid and complete fall from favour with James. Ultimately, Carr was convicted and imprisoned for 7 years in the Tower of London, marking his complete collapse from his favoured position. Carr's story is a harsh testament to the dangers of absolute power and the precariousness of courtly relationships, even with the king's favor. After Robert Carr's downfall, a new lover rose to prominence and quickly captured James III's heart: George Villars. George Villars was introduced to the court in 1614 and quickly drew the king's attention. He was described as the most handsome man in England and possessing feminine and delicate features. George's mother, Mary Villars, an ambitious woman, arranged for her son's advancement at court, knowing James favored handsome young men. James quickly became mesmerized by George, and their relationship became so shockingly public and intimate to the court. George was rapidly bestowed with numerous titles and important positions, becoming an earl, then a marquis, and finally the Duke of Buckingham. To facilitate their secret and intimate meetings, James built a secret passage directly connecting his bedroom to Villiers' chambers. This detail highlights the audacity and lack of concealment in James's personal relationships, embodying a private yet controversial aspect of royal life. James's relationship with George Villiers was not just physically intimate, but also deeply emotional, evident in the king's terms of endearment and shocking public declarations. James openly called George my sweet child, my sweet boy, my wife, and my only sweet and dear child. He even gave George the nickname Steenie, inspired by Saint Stephen, who was said to have an angelic face. George Villiers reciprocated with flattering words, ending his letters to the king with phrases like, "Your Majesty's most humble slave and dog." The peak of this public display came in a speech before the House of Lords in 1617. James compared his love for Buckingham to the relationship between Jesus Christ and his disciple John. He declared, "I, James, am not God nor an angel, but a man like any other. Therefore I act as a man and admit to loving those closer than others. Christ had his John, and I have my George." The openness and depth of this affection challenged the social and religious norms of the time, revealing a surprisingly human aspect of the king. This astonished and enraged many, yet James remained resolute in maintaining these relationships. Under James's patronage, the Villiers family ascended the social ladder and amassed immense wealth, often through questionable means. George's mother, Mary Villiers, an ambitious woman, became Countess, then Marchioness, and finally Duchess of Buckingham, wielding significant power and influence at court. She exploited her son's relationship to arrange marriages and positions for her other children. A tragic example was the marriage of her eldest son, John Villiers, who was reportedly mentally unstable. Mary arranged John's marriage to Frances Coke, a wealthy heiress who was only 13 years old. Frances's father, Sir Edward Coke, initially refused to pay the full dowry, but was later pressured into agreeing to regain his position. Frances fiercely resisted, with some accounts even recording that she was tied to her bed and whipped into submission to force her consent to the marriage. She openly wept throughout the ceremony. This marriage was an utter disaster due to John's mental state. Frances later had an adulterous affair and bore children, and was accused of adultery and witchcraft by Buckingham himself, forcing her into exile in France. George's other brothers, like Christopher Villiers, though described as unattractive, unintelligent and alcoholic, also received titles and wealth thanks to George's favor. This story illustrates the negative impact of royal favoritism and how power can be abused for personal gain, leading to family and social tragedies. Mary Villiers, George's mother, remained insatiably ambitious. She was determined to secure the family lineage and wealth by forcing George to marry Catherine Manners, the wealthiest woman in England outside the royal family. Initially, James opposed this marriage because Catherine was a staunch Catholic, which went against his anti-Catholic policies. However, Mary Villiers orchestrated a bold and notorious scheme. She invited Catherine to her estate for dinner and arranged for an unexplained bout of illness, forcing Catherine to stay overnight. That very night, George Villiers unexpectedly appeared and spent the night under the same roof as Catherine, with Mary as chaperone. Catherine's father, believing his daughter's honor irreparably damaged, demanded that George marry her immediately. George initially refused to marry Catherine, but the marriage eventually took place a few weeks later on May 16, 1620. Although this marriage stemmed from a cruel trick, Catherine Manners was described as a gentle and virtuous woman, rare in a court rife with depravity, James I accepted Catherine as a member of his family, and she became George's most loyal wife, bearing him 4 children. This detail exemplifies the ruthlessness and calculation in aristocratic marriages, and how even the most intimate royal relationships could be manipulated for personal gain. James I died on March 27, 1625, at the age of 70, after protracted health issues. His final days were shrouded in suspicious intervention by George Villars in his treatment. When the king's condition worsened and his chief physician was unavailable, Buckingham assembled a group including doctors, alchemists, and those considered medical practitioners to treat the king. Buckingham's mother also insisted on participating. Most disturbingly, there was a suspicious lack of consistency in the treatment, and Buckingham personally administered a daily poison to James. Although some courtiers objected because these individuals were not formally sworn to serve the king, James still trusted George and allowed their involvement. Weeks before his death, James accused George, "You are trying to kill me," an accusation Buckingham denounced as delusional. After James's death, Buckingham's enemies quickly accused him of poisoning the king. While these accusations were dismissed for a long time, recent historical sources, such as Benjamin Woolley's 2018 book, have raised serious questions about whether Buckingham deliberately poisoned James. Woolley argues it might have been an accident due to the use of dubious medications while the king was weakened by malaria, but also presents compelling evidence that Buckingham, driven by ambition and dissatisfaction with James's peace policies, intentionally poisoned him. The mysterious death of James I and the accusations against George Villiers highlight the ruthless power struggles and ever-present suspicions within royal courts. James I's controversial life concluded in 1625, but the legacy of his personal relationships persists even in his final resting place. James I was buried at Westminster Abbey, a site typically reserved for royalty. What is particularly remarkable and shocking is that his tomb lies right next to those of 2 of his most significant male lovers, Esme Stuart, Duke of Lennox, and George Villiers, Duke of Buckingham. George Villiers' tomb is located in Henry VII's chapel at Westminster Abbey, close to James's resting place. As for Esme Stuart, though he died in Paris, his embalmed heart was brought back to James and may have been buried near the king. This arrangement is a powerful and poignant reminder of James I's unusual personal life. It defied the social and religious norms of his era, leaving an unforgettable mark on history, affirming the relationships that shaped his life until his last breath. Even after death, James openly acknowledged the relationships he lived fully. After uncovering these 12 bizarre facts, what do you think of King James I? Share your thoughts in the comments section below. We always want to hear from you. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the Mr.Q channel so you don't miss any of the other unique and dramatic history stories where we continue to uncover hidden truths.